At 30,000 feet, Captain Jensen collapsed. The plane spiraled downward as alarms screamed. A hidden passenger rushed to the cockpit. She grabbed the controls and called for help. When F-22 pilots heard her call sign Phoenix 7, they froze in complete shock. She was supposed to be gone forever. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Denver International Airport. Flight 847 to Seattle sat at Gate B-17, boarding passengers for what should have been a routine 2-hour flight. Among the travelers settling into their seats was a woman who kept her face hidden beneath a worn baseball cap. Her name was Rachel Morrison. Once, that name had meant something in military aviation circles. Once, she had been Captain Rachel Morrison, call sign Phoenix 7, one of the most decorated fighter pilots in the United States Air Force. Once, she had been destined for greatness. That was before the accident that killed 3 of her squadron members. Before the investigation that blamed her for their deaths. Before the media crucified her as a reckless pilot who valued glory over safety. Before the Air Force stripped her of her wings and discharged her in disgrace. 3 years had passed since that day. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of shame. 3 years of working menial jobs under different names, always moving, always looking over her shoulder, terrified someone would recognize her face. Rachel pressed herself against the window in seat 23A and opened a book she had no intention of reading. Around her, passengers settled in with the usual pre-flight rituals. A businessman across the aisle complained loudly into his phone about airline fees. Behind her, a young mother struggled with a fussy toddler. 2 rows up, an elderly couple held hands as the plane prepared for departure. The flight attendant making her way down the aisle paused at Rachel's row. She tilted her head, studying Rachel's face with a frown of recognition. "Have we met before? You look so familiar." Rachel pulled the cap lower. "I get that a lot. Just have one of those faces." The attendant smiled politely and moved on, but Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. She had been recognized before. Twice in the past year, someone had pointed at her in a grocery store or coffee shop, whispering to their companion. "That is her. That is the pilot who killed those people." Each time, Rachel had fled. Changed cities, changed jobs, started over again. The businessman's voice drifted across the aisle, loud and confident. "Yeah, I remember that story from a few years back. Some hotshot Air Force pilot got cocky during a training exercise. 3 people died because of her arrogance. They should have thrown her in prison instead of just kicking her out." Rachel's fingers tightened on her book. She wanted to scream at him that he did not know what really happened. That the investigation had been incomplete, that the systems had failed, not her. But she stayed silent, as always. The world had already decided she was guilty. Nothing she said would change that. The aircraft door sealed shut with a heavy thunk. The engines began their familiar whine. Rachel closed her eyes and tried to control her breathing as the plane pushed back from the gate. Flying used to bring her joy. Now it brought only pain and bitter memories. Captain Jensen's voice came through the speakers, smooth and professional. "Good morning, folks. Beautiful day for flying. We will be cruising at 32,000 feet with clear skies all the way to Seattle. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The plane accelerated down the runway. Rachel felt the familiar lift as the wheels left the ground. For just a moment, muscle memory took over, and she felt that old thrill of defying gravity. Then the memories crashed back in, and the thrill turned to nausea. She had not flown as a pilot in 3 years. Had not touched a control stick, had not felt the responsive power of an aircraft under her command. Some nights she dreamed she was flying again, only to wake up in her tiny apartment, grounded and broken. The flight leveled off. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began moving about the cabin. The businessman ordered a drink. The mother behind Rachel finally got her toddler to sleep. The elderly couple dozed peacefully. Rachel tried to focus on her book, but the words blurred together. Her mind kept drifting back to that day 3 years ago. The training mission over Nevada. 4 F-16's in formation. She had been the flight leader, the most experienced pilot. When the warning indicators had started flashing, she had made the call to continue the exercise. 30 seconds later, 3 aircraft had gone into uncontrolled spins. 3 pilots had died. Only Rachel survived. The investigation concluded she had ignored critical warnings. Made reckless decisions. Put her desire for a perfect exercise above crew safety. The report used words like arrogant, negligent, and criminally irresponsible. What the investigation had not found, what Rachel had tried desperately to tell them, was that the warning systems had malfunctioned. The sensor data she relied on had been completely wrong. By the time she realized the truth, it was too late to save her teammates. But the black box data was corrupted. There was no proof. And 3 families needed someone to blame for their devastating losses. Rachel became that someone. The media had been merciless. Her face appeared on every news channel with damning headlines. Hotshot pilot kills 3 in training disaster. Arrogance proves deadly. Former squadron leader stripped of wings after fatal crash. The families of the dead pilots held press conferences. They called her a murderer. One father stood outside her apartment building for weeks with a sign that read, "My son died because of Captain Rachel Morrison." Eventually, Rachel stopped fighting. Stopped defending herself. Stopped existing as the person she had been. She disappeared into anonymity, taking jobs that required no background checks, living in cheap apartments under different names, becoming invisible. 30 minutes into the flight, Rachel noticed something wrong. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in the engine vibration that most passengers would not detect. But Rachel had thousands of hours of flight time. She knew the difference between normal and not normal. She sat up straighter, listening intently. The vibration increased. The engine pitch changed, becoming uneven. Other passengers began to notice now. Conversations faltered. People glanced around nervously. Then the announcement came, but not from the cockpit. A flight attendant's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a doctor on board, please identify yourself immediately. This is a medical emergency." Rachel's training kicked in automatically. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, scanning the cabin. A woman 3 rows ahead raised her hand. "I am a nurse." The flight attendant rushed to her, spoke in urgent whispers, then both women hurried toward the cockpit. The cabin erupted in worried murmurs. Parents pulled children close. The businessman stopped his phone call mid-sentence. Rachel moved into the aisle. She knew she should not get involved. Getting involved meant being seen, being recognized, being dragged back into the spotlight she had spent 3 years avoiding. But her instincts screamed that something was seriously wrong. She made her way forward. Another flight attendant blocked her path. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." "What happened?" Rachel asked quietly. The attendant hesitated, then leaned closer. "The captain collapsed. We have medical personnel attending to him. The co-pilot is flying the plane. Everything is under control." Rachel nodded and returned to her seat, but she knew everything was not under control. The engine vibration was getting worse. The aircraft's attitude felt wrong. They were losing altitude, she was certain of it. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The tension in the cabin grew thicker. Babies started crying. Passengers whispered urgently to each other. Flight attendants tried to maintain calm, but fear showed in their eyes. Then Rachel heard it. The sound every pilot dreads. Alarms blaring from the cockpit, loud, insistent warnings that could mean only one thing: critical system failure. The plane lurched violently to the left. Luggage tumbled from overhead bins. Passengers screamed. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, yellow cups dangling on their tubes like jellyfish. The co-pilot's voice came over the intercom, strained and desperate. "Ladies and gentlemen, put on your oxygen masks now. We are experiencing technical difficulties. Remain calm and follow crew instructions." But the plane was not leveling out. It continued its sickening tilt, the left wing dropping lower and lower. Through her window, Rachel saw the horizon tilting at an impossible angle. They were going into a spiral. She did not think. She just moved. Rachel ripped off her baseball cap and pushed through the panicking passengers toward the cockpit. A flight attendant tried to stop her. "Ma'am, you absolutely cannot go up there right now." Rachel grabbed the woman's shoulders and looked directly into her terrified eyes. "I am a pilot. I can help. If nobody gets in that cockpit right now, everyone on this plane is going to die. Do you understand me?" Something in Rachel's voice, in her unwavering gaze, made the attendant step aside. Rachel burst through the cockpit door. The scene was chaos. Captain Jensen lay unconscious on the floor, the nurse performing CPR with desperate efficiency. The co-pilot, a young man who looked barely 30, sat at the controls with sweat pouring down his face and terror in his eyes. "I have lost hydraulics," he gasped. "I cannot pull us out. I cannot stop the descent. We are going down." Rachel moved to the captain's seat without asking permission. Her hands found the controls instantly. 10,000 hours of flight time. Muscle memory took over. She scanned the instruments in seconds. Primary hydraulic failure. Backup system failing. 28,000 feet and dropping fast, airspeed too high, the spiral tightening with every passing second. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. Trim adjustment. Throttle reduction on the right engine. Increase on the left. Small movements, careful corrections, fighting the dying aircraft with everything she had learned in years of training. The plane's violent shaking began to decrease. The spiral started to widen. The wings slowly, agonizingly slowly, began to level out. "Who are you?" the co-pilot whispered, staring at her in shock. "Someone who knows how to fly." Rachel's voice was steady and cold. "Pure focus. Keep trying to restart the primary hydraulics. I need those systems back online now." She pulled them out of the spiral at 23,000 feet. They were level now, but far from safe. Without full hydraulics, controlling the aircraft was like trying to steer a car with cut brake lines. Every input required 3 times the normal force, and the response was sluggish and unpredictable. Rachel keyed the radio. "This is Commercial Flight 847 declaring an emergency. Captain incapacitated. Primary hydraulics failed. Requesting immediate assistance and priority landing clearance." "Flight 847, this is Denver Center," a controller responded immediately. "Confirm emergency status. What is your current situation?" Rachel rattled off the technical details with military precision. Altitude, heading, fuel remaining, extent of damage. No wasted words. Only critical information. There was a brief pause. Then a different voice came through the radio, deeper and more authoritative. "Flight 847, this is Colonel Harrison with Air Force Northern Command. We are scrambling fighter escort to your position. I need to know the qualification level of whoever is currently flying that aircraft." Rachel hesitated for only a heartbeat. "Former Air Force fighter pilot. 10 years combat and training experience." "Copy that. Confirm your call sign for the record." Rachel's hand tightened on the yoke. She had not spoken these words in 3 years. Had sworn she never would again. But there was no choice now. Phoenix 7. The radio went completely silent. Not the normal pause of someone processing information. The absolute dead silence of utter shock. 60 miles away at Peterson Air Force Base, two F-22 Raptor pilots were running toward their aircraft when that transmission came through their headsets. Captain Derek Matthews had one foot on the ladder to his cockpit when he heard those two words. Phoenix 7. His foot slipped. He caught himself on the rail, but he could not move. Could not climb, could not even breathe. He just stood there, frozen, staring at nothing while his mind tried to process what he had just heard. 10 feet away, Lieutenant Ryan Cooper was already in his cockpit when the words registered. His hands, which had been running through the pre-flight checklist, stopped moving entirely. He sat completely motionless, eyes wide, barely breathing. Around them, ground crew members had stopped working. Fuel trucks idled. Conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone on the flight line who had heard that transmission stood frozen, looking at each other with expressions of disbelief. Matthews finally found his voice, barely a whisper. Did she just say Phoenix 7? Cooper's response was equally stunned. That is impossible. That call sign was retired. Phoenix 7 does not exist anymore. A crew chief who had been servicing Matthews's jet spoke up, his voice shaking. Sir, that was Captain Morrison. Rachel Morrison. The one who. I know who it was, Matthews snapped, but his own voice was unsteady. His hands were shaking as he climbed into his cockpit. Rachel Morrison. Phoenix 7. The pilot blamed for killing 3 squadron members 3 years ago. The pilot who had been destroyed by the media, dishonorably discharged, and disappeared into civilian life. And now she was back in a cockpit, flying a crippled commercial airliner with partial hydraulics. The command frequency crackled to life. All units, this is Colonel Harrison. We have confirmed identity. Rachel Morrison, former captain, call sign Phoenix 7, has taken control of Flight 847 from an incapacitated co-pilot. You are cleared to launch immediately and establish escort formation. Cooper's voice came over the radio, tight and cold. Sir, with all due respect, are we really going to trust her? After what happened 3 years ago? After what she did? Matthews felt the same doubt, the same anger. Every pilot in the Air Force knew the story. 3 dead because of one person's arrogance and poor judgment. It was taught in flight school as an example of what not to do. But he also remembered something else. Before the accident, Rachel Morrison had been legendary. One of the best pilots anyone had ever seen. Simulator scores off the charts. Combat missions flown with perfect precision. A natural talent that came along once in a generation. There are 237 passengers on that plane, Matthews said quietly. Whatever happened 3 years ago, they do not deserve to die for it. He secured his canopy and ran through his startup sequence. Beside him, Cooper did the same, though his movements were stiff with reluctance. Within 2 minutes, both F-22s were rolling down the runway. Within 4 minutes, they were airborne and climbing hard toward Flight 847's position. In the crippled airliner, Rachel continued fighting for control. The co-pilot had managed to restore partial hydraulics, but the system was unstable and threatening to fail again completely. They were at 21,000 feet now, descending slowly but steadily. She ran calculations in her head. Fuel consumption, descent rate. Distance to possible landing sites. Denver was behind them. Seattle impossibly far ahead. We need to divert, she said calmly. What is the nearest suitable airport? The co-pilot checked his instruments with shaking hands. Peterson Air Force Base is 43 miles northeast. But they will never clear a commercial flight to land there. Rachel keyed the radio again. Denver Center, Flight 847 requesting emergency diversion to Peterson Air Force Base. It is our only option. Flight 847, that is a military installation, the controller responded. We need to coordinate. Tell them we have 237 souls on board and maybe 15 minutes before this aircraft is unflyable, Rachel cut him off. Tell them we do not have time for bureaucracy. There was a pause. Then Colonel Harrison's voice came back. Flight 847, you are cleared direct to Peterson. Runway 13 is being prepared. Fire and rescue standing by. Your fighter escort is inbound to your position now. Rachel acknowledged and began calculating her approach. She had flown out of Peterson dozens of times during her Air Force career. She knew every inch of that runway. But landing a crippled 737 with failing hydraulics was vastly different from landing a nimble fighter jet. Behind her, the nurse looked up from Captain Jensen. His heart stopped, but I got it back. He is stable but unconscious. He needs a hospital immediately. Understood, Rachel said without taking her eyes off the instruments. Hang on. This is going to be rough. The co-pilot stared at her with something between awe and fear. How are you so calm right now? Rachel did not answer. Calm was not what she felt. Inside, she was screaming. Every second in this cockpit brought back memories of the accident. The warnings she had ignored. The mistakes she had made. The 3 pilots who died under her command. But she pushed it all down. She had a job to do. Movement outside the windscreen caught her attention. 2 F-22 Raptors appeared, one on each wing, matching her speed and altitude with perfect precision. The sight of those sleek fighters flanking her aircraft sent a jolt of emotion through Rachel's chest. Once, she had flown jets like those. Once, she had been part of that brotherhood. Flight 847, this is Raptor 1, Matthews's voice came through her headset. We have you in visual contact. We will escort you all the way to Peterson. Thank you, Raptor 1, Rachel replied, and her voice almost broke on those 2 words. There was a long pause. Then Matthews spoke again, softer this time. Phoenix 7, this is Raptor 1. It has been a long time. Good to hear your voice. Rachel's throat tightened painfully. She had not expected kindness. Had not expected anything but more blame and judgment. The simple acknowledgement hit her harder than any accusation could have. Good to hear yours too, Raptor 1. But then Cooper's voice cut in, hard and cold. Phoenix 7, confirm you are qualified to land this aircraft. We need to know if we should be coordinating backup options. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Are you going to kill everyone on this plane like you killed your squadron? Rachel answered with facts, keeping her voice steady. I have over 10,000 flight hours. 3,000 in fighter jets. 2,000 in commercial simulators, multiple emergency landing certifications. I am qualified. Cooper did not respond. Matthews spoke instead, his voice firm. We are with you, Phoenix 7. All the way to the ground. Rachel began her descent toward Peterson. Every adjustment was a battle. The plane shuddered and groaned. The damaged hydraulics made the controls feel like they were moving through mud. She had to anticipate every response, correct before the plane even started to drift. In the cabin behind her, passengers clung to their seats in terrified silence. Some prayed. Some cried. The businessman who had mocked her earlier sat rigid with fear, his earlier confidence completely gone. The elderly couple held hands so tightly their fingers had gone white. The young mother clutched her sleeping toddler and whispered prayers. A teenage girl sobbed into her father's shoulder. An elderly man sat with his eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, their training taking over despite their own terror. Heads down. Stay down. Brace position. Remove glasses. Remove shoes. Their voices were calm even as their hands shook. Rachel called back to the senior flight attendant. Final passenger count. 237 passengers plus 8 crew. 245 souls. 245 lives depending on her. The weight settled on Rachel's shoulders, crushing and familiar. Just like 3 years ago when she had been responsible for 3 lives and failed catastrophically. No. Not like 3 years ago. This time she had accurate data. This time she knew the truth about the aircraft's condition. This time she could save them. She had to. Peterson Air Force Base appeared ahead, the long runway stretching across the Colorado landscape. Rachel lined up her approach, fighting the controls every single second. The plane wanted to roll left. She corrected. It wanted to drop the nose too quickly. She corrected. Every movement was a battle against physics and failing systems. The F-22 stayed with her, guardian angels on her wings. Flight 847, this is Peterson Tower, a new voice said. You are cleared to land. Winds calm. Visibility unlimited, emergency crews in position. Bring her home. Rachel's hands moved constantly. Throttle adjustments. Trim corrections. Fighting, always fighting. 15,000 feet. 10,000. 5,000. Gear down, she ordered. The co-pilot hit the switch. A grinding sound, then a solid thunk. Gear down and locked. 3 green lights. Flaps to landing position. More mechanical groaning. The plane slowed, dropped. Rachel compensated instantly. 3,000 feet. The runway filled her windscreen. It looked impossibly narrow, though she knew it was not. Just fear distorting perception. 2,000 feet. The F-22s peeled away, giving her room. Rachel was alone now with this wounded aircraft and 245 people trusting her to deliver them safely home. Matthews's voice came through one last time. Bring them home, Phoenix 7. We believe in you. 1,000 feet, perfect alignment. Rachel made micro-adjustments, reading the wind, feeling the aircraft respond. 500 feet. The runway rushed up. She pulled back slightly on the throttle. Raised the nose. The stall warning beeped. She ignored it, trusting her instincts. 100 feet. 50. 20. The wheels hit concrete with a screech and a hard bounce. Rachel immediately deployed what was left of the thrust reversers. The plane shuddered violently. She stood on the brakes with all her weight. The anti-lock system pulsed under her feet. The damaged aircraft tried to pull left. She fought it with the nose while steering, every muscle straining to keep them on the centerline. 5,000 feet of runway remaining. 4,000. 3,000. Still too fast. The brakes were smoking. She could smell burning rubber. 2,000 feet. 1,000. The plane finally stopped with 400 feet of runway left. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind and the dying whine of the engines. Then reality crashed back in. The co-pilot started laughing and crying simultaneously. The nurse whooped with joy. Outside, emergency vehicles surrounded them, lights flashing. Rachel sat motionless, hands still on the controls, shaking violently as 3 years of suppressed emotion came flooding out. They were alive. All of them. She had not failed. The co-pilot turned to her with tears streaming down his face. You saved us. You saved everyone. Who are you? Rachel opened her mouth but no words came. She did not know how to answer that question anymore. The emergency exit opened. Crews swarmed in. Medical personnel took over Captain Jensen's care. Passengers began evacuating down the slides, many still crying, all of them alive because of her. Rachel stood on unsteady legs and moved through the cabin. Passengers reached out as she passed. Thank you. God bless you. You are a hero. Hero. The word felt like a knife. Heroes did not get people killed. Heroes did not hide for 3 years in shame. She descended the emergency slide and her legs nearly gave out when she hit the ground. An Air Force medic rushed over. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "No. I am fine. You need medical evaluation. You are clearly in shock." But Rachel walked away from the plane, away from the crowds, away from everything. She made it 50 yards before her legs finally failed. She collapsed onto the tarmac, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. 3 years of pain poured out in racking sobs. A shadow fell across her. She looked up to see Captain Matthews standing there in his flight suit. He had landed his F-22 and come straight to her. He knelt beside her, saying nothing at first, just present. Finally, he spoke quietly. "The investigation was wrong, Rachel." She looked at him through tears. "What?" "6 months after your accident, they reopened the investigation with new analysts. They found evidence of systemic failure in the warning systems. The sensors gave you completely false data. The backup systems did not engage. You made the best decision possible with bad information. It was not your fault." Rachel stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. Matthews continued, his voice heavy. "Your commander tried to find you. We all did. They wanted to reinstate you, clear your record, apologize publicly. But you had disappeared. We sent letters, made calls, searched everywhere. You were gone. So you just let me keep believing I killed them?" Rachel's voice broke. "We did not let anything happen. You vanished. And by then the media had moved on. The families had their narrative. Reopening everything would have meant dragging everyone through it again. But we never stopped looking for you." Other figures approached. Lieutenant Cooper, looking uncomfortable. Colonel Harrison. The base commander. They formed a circle around her. Harrison spoke first. "Captain Morrison. On behalf of the United States Air Force, I apologize. You were failed by faulty systems. You were failed by an incomplete investigation. You were failed by all of us. And then we let you disappear into shame when you deserved honor." Rachel could not speak. Her throat was too tight. The base commander stepped forward. "What you did today proves what we should have known 3 years ago. You are an exceptional pilot. You saved 245 lives with a crippled aircraft. That kind of skill, that kind of courage under pressure, that is what we need." Cooper spoke next, and his voice was strained. "I believed the media stories. I thought you were reckless. I was wrong. I am sorry." Matthews extended his hand. "Welcome back, Phoenix 7. Rachel took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. She stood there surrounded by fighter jets and emergency vehicles and people who finally knew the truth. The weight she had carried for 3 years had not disappeared, but it had shifted. It was no longer crushing her. The story exploded across media within hours. The same outlets that destroyed her 3 years ago now called her a hero. Disgraced pilot saves flight. Phoenix rises again. The truth finally revealed. Passengers from Flight 847 reached out with hundreds of messages. "Thank you for my life. Thank you for bringing me home to my family. Thank you for being brave. Thank you." The families of the pilots who died 3 years ago learned the truth about the reopened investigation. Some reached out to apologize. The father who had protested outside her apartment sent a letter that simply said, "I was wrong. I am sorry. Please forgive me." Rachel stood in her tiny apartment reading these messages, trying to understand this new reality. The Air Force had extended an offer. Full reinstatement, full rank. A position training new pilots. She walked to her closet and pulled out a box. Inside was her old flight suit, her patches, her wings. She had kept them all this time. She lifted out the flight suit and held it up. Underneath the smell of storage, she could still detect the faint scent of jet fuel. Home. Rachel made her decision. 2 months later, she stood on the flight line at Peterson Air Force Base wearing her flight suit. Her call sign patch back on her shoulder. Phoenix 7. A group of young pilots approached, eager and nervous. One young woman raised her hand. "Captain Morrison, is it true you landed a commercial jet with partial hydraulics?" "Yes," Rachel said. "And I was terrified every second. But I had training and purpose. Sometimes that is enough." Another pilot asked, "How did you come back from what happened 3 years ago?" Rachel looked at him steadily. "I learned that failure is not the end unless you let it be. I learned that truth matters even when nobody wants to hear it. I learned that you can lose everything and still find reasons to keep going. And I learned that redemption is possible if you are willing to face your fears." Matthews walked up beside her. "They are lucky to learn from you. I hope I can teach them something worth learning." "You already are." Rachel watched the young pilots walk to their aircraft. She hoped they would never face what she had faced. But if they did, she hoped they would remember that survival was possible. That redemption was real. She turned to Matthews. "Want to go up?" He grinned. "Thought you would never ask." They walked to their jets together. Rachel climbed into her cockpit, and everything felt right again. The instruments, the controls, the smell of the oxygen system, home. "Tower, this is Phoenix 7 requesting clearance for takeoff." "Phoenix 7, you are cleared. Welcome back." Rachel taxied to the runway. She lined up, checked her instruments, and advanced the throttle. The engine roared. The jet accelerated. The nose lifted. And Rachel was flying again. Up in the sky, free from gravity and judgment, she felt whole again. Different than before, scarred, wiser. More aware of how fragile everything was. But also more aware of how resilient people could be. How much courage existed in choosing to keep going. How purpose could carry someone through darkness. She thought about Flight 847's passengers going home with a story they would tell forever. She thought about the 3 pilots who died 3 years ago. She still carried them. Would always carry them, but now as memory and honor, not as guilt and shame. Matthews's voice came through her headset. "How does it feel, Phoenix 7? Rachel looked at the endless blue sky. She rolled her jet smoothly, feeling alive and present and finally at peace. "It feels like coming home," she replied. Below her, life continued. Families gathered. Children played. Workers commuted. Unaware that above them flew a pilot who had learned the hardest lessons and earned the rarest gift. A second chance. The sun began to set, painting the sky gold and orange. Rachel flew through that color, chasing light, leaving darkness behind. Not forgetting it but no longer defined by it. She was Phoenix 7. And she had risen from the ashes.